Audrey Hepburn was, according to every official biography, the daughter of a Dutch baroness and an Anglo-Irish banker. That sentence has been printed in over 400 books. It was wrong in a way nobody bothered to check until 2019. The first crack came from a single hair. It was held in a private collection in Lausanne, sealed inside an envelope dated 1959, donated by a hairdresser who had worked on the set of Green Mansions. For 60 years, it sat untouched. Then, a Swiss genealogical lab, working on a biographical project for a European broadcaster, asked the family for permission to test it. The family, after some hesitation, agreed. The result did not match the family tree. I want to be careful here because there are people alive today, her sons, her grandchildren, cousins in 3 countries, who carry her name and her face. This is not a story about exposing anyone. It is a story about how a public life can rest on a private record nobody questioned, and what happens when the record finally speaks. Here is what every biography says. Audrey Kathleen Ruston was born in Brussels in 1929. Her mother was Baroness Ella van Heemstra, descended from Dutch nobility traceable to the 17th century. Her father was Joseph Ruston, later Hepburn-Ruston, an Anglo-Irish businessman with roots in Bohemia and, supposedly, a distant connection to the third wife of James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell. That last detail, the Bothwell line, is where the official story has always been thinnest. Audrey herself repeated it in interviews. Her son Sean wrote about it. It became part of the legend. It was also, according to the 2019 analysis, almost entirely fictional. Let that settle for a moment. A claim made by a woman about her own father, repeated for 70 years, accepted by every biographer, indexed in every reference work, was not supported by the genetic record on either side of the family. The Bothwell line did not exist. What existed instead was something the official record had no language for. 2 separate investigations were running at the same time, and neither knew about the other until late 2020. The first was the Swiss genetic study. The second was a Dutch archival project led by a researcher named Annemarie Zijlstra, a historian at Leiden University who had spent 11 years reconstructing the wartime movements of the Van Heemstra family. She was not looking for a scandal, she was looking for a missing cousin. What she found instead was a baptismal record from Velp, a small Dutch town outside Arnhem, dated March 1935. The record listed a child the Van Heemstra family had never publicly acknowledged. The mother's name was redacted. The father's name was not. It was not Joseph Ruston. I read that section of her paper 3 times before I understood what I was reading. The implication is not subtle. I am not sure why it has not generated more attention. The genetic study and the archival study converged at a single point in late 2021. The hair sample carried a maternal lineage, what geneticists call mitochondrial DNA, which is passed only from mother to child, that did not match the Van Heemstra mitochondrial profile published in a 2014 Dutch nobility study. It was close, but it was not the same. Now, the strongest counterargument here is the one any honest researcher has to consider first. Mitochondrial DNA can mutate. Sample contamination is real. A single hair from a film set in 1959 is not a clean laboratory specimen. The lab in Lausanne knew this. They ran the test 4 times. They sent a portion of the sample to a second lab in Leipzig. They cross-referenced against 3 separate Van Heemstra descendants who had volunteered DNA for the Dutch nobility project. The result held. The maternal line in the hair did not descend from the Van Heemstra women. That is the kind of sentence that should stop a biographer cold. It did not stop them, because almost none of them know about it yet. The study was published in a specialist journal with a circulation of about 900 readers. Keep that number in mind. We will come back to it. The Dutch archival side of the story is, in some ways, harder to dismiss than the genetic side. Documents do not contaminate. The baptismal record from Velp exists. It is publicly available. It has been publicly available since 1947, when the parish records were transferred to the regional archive. Nobody cited it for 72 years. The reason nobody cited it is the reason most uncomfortable records stay uncited. Ella van Heemstra spent the early 1930s in circles that her family later worked very hard to erase. She attended rallies in Munich in 1935. She wrote articles for a fascist publication in London under a pen name. She traveled to Germany at least 4 times between 1935 and 1937, on dates that did not match her official itinerary. The Van Heemstra family, after the war, made a sustained effort to seal these years. They were partly successful. Audrey herself spoke about her mother's politics with a kind of pained honesty in later interviews. What she did not speak about, what she may not have known, was who her mother had been with during one of those German trips. Zijlstra's research suggests, carefully and without overstatement, that the child baptized in Velp in March 1935 was not raised by the Van Heemstra family. The child was placed with a farming family in Gelderland and disappears from the public record by 1940. The implication that this child was Audrey's half-sibling, or possibly something stranger in the family record, sits in Zijlstra's footnotes rather than her main text. Academic historians do not often write sentences they cannot fully prove. This is where the two tracks meet. If the maternal line in the hair sample does not match the Van Heemstra women, and if the Velp baptismal record names a father who was not Joseph Ruston, the simplest explanation is not the most scandalous one. The simplest explanation is that the family Audrey grew up believing was her family had a structure she was never told about. Whether that meant a different father, a different mother, or an adoption that was never formalized in writing, the genetic record cannot distinguish between these possibilities on its own. The counterargument here deserves its full weight. Ella van Heemstra was demonstrably present at Audrey's birth. Hospital records in Brussels confirm it. Photographs from 1929 and 1930 show mother and infant together. Whatever the genetic anomaly means, it does not mean Ella was not Audrey's mother in every meaningful sense. But the mitochondrial line is inherited only from the biological mother. And the mitochondrial line in the hair sample is not Van Heemstra. The third expert in this story entered through a different door. His name is Tomas Lindqvist, a population geneticist at Uppsala who specializes in Northern European maternal haplogroups, the deep ancestral branches that mitochondrial DNA falls into. He was asked to review the Lausanne data in 2022. What he found was that the haplogroup in the hair sample was H1c3, a lineage common in parts of Bohemia and southern Germany, but rare in the Dutch nobility. It was, however, present at elevated frequency in one specific community, the Romani populations of Central Europe. He stated this carefully. A single haplogroup match does not prove Romani ancestry. Many non-Romani Europeans also carry H1c3. He was not making a claim about identity. He was identifying a statistical pattern that the official Van Heemstra lineage did not predict and could not explain. There are people alive today who carry this haplogroup in their family name, their face, their language. Communities that were systematically erased during the same war that shaped Audrey's childhood. That is not a small thing to sit with. The implication that hangs over the rest of the research, and it is only an implication, not a finding, is that somewhere in the maternal line behind Audrey Hepburn, there is a woman whose origin was deliberately unwritten. A woman whose presence in a Dutch noble family in the 1920s or 1930s would have been a problem the family chose to solve through silence. We do not know who she was. The records that would identify her were destroyed, or were never created, or are sitting in a private archive nobody has opened. This is the part of the story where intellectual honesty matters more than any conclusion. The evidence does not give us a name. It gives us an absence in a place where the official story said there was no absence at all. What does this change about Audrey Hepburn? In one sense, nothing. Her films are her films. Her humanitarian work in the last decade of her life, the trips to Somalia, the visits to refugee camps in Sudan, the testimony before the United States Congress about famine in Ethiopia. None of that depends on her ancestry. She earned that work. It belonged to her. In another sense, it changes the shape of a life that has always been told as a story about Dutch resilience and aristocratic survival. The wartime starvation in Arnhem, the tulip bulbs eaten as food, the trauma she carried into her 30s. These were real, but they may have been the surface of a deeper inheritance. A woman whose own maternal line had been rewritten before she was born, working through the long aftermath of a century that erased people quietly and without records. Remember the number 900. That was the circulation of the journal where the genetic study appeared. The reason this finding has not been absorbed into the public record is not that it was hidden. It is that it was placed somewhere most biographers do not read. The document exists. It is publicly available. Almost nobody has cited it. The hair in the envelope in Lausanne, donated by a hairdresser in 1959, sealed for 60 years, tested 4 times in 2 countries, came from a woman who told the world her ancestry was one thing and may have been told, by the people who raised her, something that was not true. She lived her whole life inside that story. She died inside it in 1993. What the evidence leaves us with is not a scandal. It is a quieter thing. It is the recognition that even the most documented life of the 20th century rested on a record somebody had decided, generations earlier, not to write down. There are families across Europe whose histories carry the same shape. The names are different. The silence is the same. The hair is still in Lausanne. The baptismal record is still in Velp. The haplogroup is still H1c3. None of that has changed since 2022. What has changed is that we now know to look.